The world is not born equal. It was a harsh, immutable truth that humanity had been forced to swallow ever since the first glowing baby illuminated a delivery room in Xingqing City over a century ago. From that moment onward, the impossible became the mundane. The laws of physics, thermodynamics, and biology were rewritten by the sudden, explosive introduction of quirks. Society adapted, shifting from the era of normal men to an era of gods and monsters, where a child could breathe fire, move objects with a thought, or sprout wings and take to the sky. For a 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya, the world was a canvas of infinite, dazzling possibilities, painted entirely in the bright, primary colors of heroes. Izuku's bedroom was a shrine to this new age of miracles. Posters of the symbol of peace, All Might, plastered every square inch of available wall space. Action figures stood in rigid, heroic poses on his shelves, and his bedsheets were a kaleidoscope of red, white, and blue. To Izuku, quirks were not just genetic anomalies. They were a divine promise. They were the tools given to people so they could protect one another. They were the very essence of heroism. He spent his days in a state of vibrating anticipation, waiting for the day his own power would manifest. He would sit by the window of his family's small apartment in Yuzurifu, watching the pro-heroes swing, fly, and leap across the cityscape, his wide, emerald-green eyes shining with an almost religious fervor. "Mom!" he would shout, rushing into the kitchen with an all-might figure clutched tightly in his chubby fist. "Do you think my quirk will be like yours? Will I be able to float things? Or maybe I'll breathe fire like Dad? Or maybe I'll get something brand new. Something super strong." Inko Midoriya would smile down at her son, her heart swelling with an unconditional, protective love. She would gently levitate a small toy block into his waiting hand, her own modest quirk a testament to the everyday magic of their world. "I'm sure whatever it is, Izuku, it will be wonderful. You have the heart of a hero." But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Izuku's 4th birthday had come and gone. Most of his classmates at the local preschool had already awakened to their abilities. There were kids who could stretch their fingers like taffy, kids who could make flowers bloom from the dirt, and then, there was Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo Katsuki was a force of nature. He was everything Izuku admired and everything that terrified him. Bakugo possessed a quirk called Explosion, allowing him to secrete nitroglycerin-like sweat from his palms and ignite it at will. At 4 years old, he was already a prodigy, a fierce, arrogant king of the playground who demanded absolute loyalty and submission from his peers. "Look at this!" Bakugo had crowed on the day his quirk manifested, holding up his small hands as sharp, crackling pops of light and smoke burst from his skin. The other children had gasped in awe, shrinking back from the heat and the noise. "I'm gonna be the #1 hero. Better than All Might. And all of you are just extras." Izuku had been the first to run up to him, his eyes sparkling with genuine, unadulterated awe. "Kaken! That's amazing. It's so flashy and strong. You're definitely going to be a hero." Bakugo had looked at Izuku, his crimson eyes narrowing slightly, a smirk playing on his lips. "Course I am, Izuku. But what about you? Still nothing?" "It's coming," Izuku had replied defensively, though a tiny seed of doubt had already begun to take root in his stomach. Any day now, that seed of doubt was what drove Izuku to follow Bakugo with even more devotion. If he didn't have his own power yet, he could at least bask in the glow of someone who did. He became a permanent fixture in Bakugo's shadow, part of the entourage that trailed behind the explosive blonde as they explored the neighborhood, searching for imaginary villains to conquer. It was mid-July, the height of a sweltering, oppressive summer, when the world shattered. The air was thick with humidity, the deafening drone of cicadas serving as a relentless soundtrack to the heat. Bakugo had decided that the local playground was too boring, too pedestrian for future heroes. He declared an expedition to the dense, untamed woods that bordered the edge of their suburban neighborhood, a place strictly forbidden by their parents. "Come on, you cowards!" Bakugo shouted, marching at the head of their small group, a thick wooden stick held aloft like a conquering general's sword. "There's a secret base out here, I just know it. Anyone who turns back isn't fit to be my sidekick." 2 other boys, a kid with small, leathery wings and another with extendable fingers, exchanged nervous glances but dutifully hurried after him. Izuku brought up the rear, his small yellow backpack bouncing against his shoulders, a notebook clutched to his chest. He was terrified of getting into trouble, but the fear of being left behind, of being deemed unworthy by Kaken, was far stronger. The woods were a different world. The canopy of ancient oak and pine trees blotted out the harsh summer sun, casting the forest floor in a mosaic of deep shadows and dappled, golden light. The air smelled of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the sharp, green scent of crushed pine needles. It felt wild. It felt dangerous. Kaken, Izuku stammered, stepping over a thick, gnarled tree root. Maybe we should go back? It's getting pretty far from the street. My mom said. I don't care what Auntie Inko said. Bakugo snapped, whirling around, a small pop of sparks leaping from his palm to emphasize his point. I make the rules here. If you're scared, go home and cry to your mommy. But I'm moving forward. Izuku swallowed hard, his throat dry, and shook his head. I'm not scared. They pushed deeper into the woods, the undergrowth growing thicker, the terrain more uneven. Eventually, the sound of rushing water cut through the drone of the insects. They emerged into a small clearing that abruptly ended at the edge of a deep, jagged ravine. At the bottom, maybe 30 feet down, a swollen, fast-moving creek roared over sharp, moss-slicked rocks. Spanning the gap, serving as a precarious bridge between the two sides of the ravine, was a massive, fallen oak tree. It was old and rotting, its bark peeling away in damp, gray strips. Whoa, the winged boy breathed, stepping back from the edge. That's a huge drop. Bakugo's eyes lit up with a dangerous, manic glee. Perfect. This is the ultimate test. We have to cross the Bridge of Doom to reach the villain's lair. Kaken, no! Izuku cried out, his voice cracking with genuine panic as he rushed forward. That log looks rotten. It's not safe. If you fall, you'll... He couldn't even finish the sentence. The rocks at the bottom of the ravine looked like jagged teeth. Bakugo sneered, stepping right up to the edge. Shut up, Deku. Only weaklings think about falling. Watch me. Without a moment's hesitation, Bakugo hopped onto the thick trunk of the fallen tree. He held his arms out for balance, a cocky grin plastered across his face, and began to walk across the chasm. The other two boys watched in a mixture of terror and awe, remaining firmly planted on the safe ground. Izuku felt his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct in his body screamed at him that this was wrong, that disaster was imminent. He stood paralyzed at the edge, his eyes locked on Bakugo's small form as it moved further out over the rushing water. 10 feet. 15 feet. Bakugo reached the center of the log, turning back to flash a triumphant, arrogant smirk at his followers. See? Easy! Bakugo shouted over the roar of the water. He stomped his foot down on the wood to emphasize his point. You guys are just... Crack! The sound was sharp, violent, and deafening, echoing like a gunshot through the trees. Time seemed to grind to a horrifying, agonizing halt. The center of the rotting log simply gave way beneath Bakugo's stomp. The damp, decayed wood splintered and caved in. Bakugo's smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror as his footing completely disappeared. He flailed his arms, a desperate, instinctive burst of small explosions erupting from his palms in a futile attempt to correct his balance. But it wasn't enough. The force of the explosions only pushed him further off-center. With a sharp, breathless scream, Katsuki Bakugo plummeted over the edge, plummeting toward the jagged rocks below. The other two boys froze, paralyzed by shock. But Izuku didn't freeze. In that fraction of a second, as Izuku watched his childhood friend, his idol, fall toward certain death, something inside the 4-year-old boy simply snapped. It was not a conscious decision. It was a biological imperative, an overwhelming, primal demand from his soul that refused to let someone die before his eyes. His body moved on its own, but his small, weak, 4-year-old muscles were not fast enough. They were not strong enough. They could never cover the 15 feet to the center of the ravine, and catch a falling body in time. Physics dictated that Katsuki Bakugo was going to die, and so, Izuku Midoriya's dormant quirk awakened to rewrite physics. It happened in the space between heartbeats. Deep within Izuku's brain, inside the motor cortex and the basal ganglia, The human body's natural limiters, the neurological safeguards designed to prevent a person from exerting more than 20% of their muscular capacity to prevent self-destruction, were violently, forcibly eradicated. It was a somatic mutation of terrifying, unprecedented design. A quirk that did not manipulate the outside world, but aggressively, suicidally weaponized the internal one. The first gate, the gate of opening. Izuku felt a sensation unlike anything he had ever known. It wasn't the warmth of fire or the tingling of electricity. It was an explosion of pure, unadulterated agony and boundless, terrifying power. It felt as though a dam had burst inside his veins. A colossal, unnatural surge of adrenaline and bioelectricity flooded his nervous system. His heart rate instantaneously skyrocketed from a terrified 80 beats per minute to an inhuman 300 beats per minute. Blood pumped through his small arteries with such immense, violent pressure that his skin instantly flushed a deep, furious crimson. A sudden, visible shockwave of energy erupted from Izuku's tiny frame, violently displacing the air around him and flattening the nearby grass. To the terrified onlookers, it looked as though a sudden, localized hurricane had been born around the green-haired boy. A strange, luminescent green aura flared around him, sweat evaporating instantly off his burning skin due to the catastrophic spike in his core body temperature. His muscles, forced to contract at 100% of their absolute biological maximum, began to tear themselves apart. Izuku didn't scream. There was no breath left in his lungs to scream. He moved. To the naked eye, Izuku simply vanished from the edge of the ravine. The ground where he had been standing cratered inward, dirt and grass exploding upward from the sheer, incomprehensible kinetic force of his launch. He was a green blur, moving at a speed that tore the air apart, creating a sharp, whistling sonic crack. In less than a tenth of a second, Izuku had cleared the 15-foot distance. He was in the air, directly beneath the shattering log, perfectly intercepting Bakugo's falling body. Izuku reached out with both arms, wrapping them tightly around Bakugo's torso. But saving someone at that speed comes with a terrible price. The laws of momentum are unforgiving. Catching a 40-pound weight while moving at the speed of a fired cannonball generated a catastrophic amount of kinetic feedback. The moment Izuku grabbed Bakugo and twisted his body midair to land on the opposite, solid bank of the ravine, his arms bore the entire, concentrated brunt of the force. The sound was sickening. A wet, horrific crunch that overpowered the roar of the river below. Izuku hit the ground on the opposite side of the ravine, skidding through the dirt and tearing a massive trench through the earth with his heels before crashing into the trunk of a large pine tree. He held Bakugo securely against his chest, shielding the blond boy entirely from the impact. Silence descended upon the forest, broken only by the rushing water and the rustling of leaves settling back down. Bakugo, his eyes wide and completely blown out with shock, found himself lying on his back in the dirt, completely uninjured. He gasped for air, his mind unable to process how he had gone from falling to his death to lying on solid ground in the blink of an eye. He slowly sat up, his hands trembling. Deku. Beside him lay Izuku Midoriya. The green, glowing aura had vanished, leaving behind a terrifying scene. Izuku's skin was violently flushed, bruised a deep, mottled purple across his chest and neck from the burst capillaries. He was unconscious, his small face contorted in an expression of absolute, unimaginable agony. Blood trickled from his nose, his lips, and his ears. But the most horrific sight was his arms. Both of Izuku's arms were mangled beyond recognition. They were bent at impossible, horrifying angles, the limbs swollen and purple. The bones in his forearms and biceps had not just broken, they had shattered under the catastrophic pressure of 100% muscular exertion combined with the kinetic impact of the rescue. The muscles themselves were severely torn, the tendons snapped like over-tightened guitar strings. He had saved Bakugo. And in doing so, he had utterly destroyed himself. Bakugo stared at the broken, bleeding body of his friend, his 4-year-old mind fracturing under the weight of a horrific realization. He let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream that echoed through the woods, terrifying the two boys on the other side of the ravine into finally running for help. The world returned to Izuku Midoriya not as light, but as fire. He didn't open his eyes immediately. He couldn't. His eyelids felt like they were sewn shut, weighed down by an immense, crushing exhaustion. But the pain was a living, breathing entity that had taken up residence inside his very marrow. It radiated from his shoulders down to his fingertips, a pulsing, white-hot agony that made him want to vomit. Every time his heart beat, a fresh wave of liquid fire washed over his upper body. A rhythmic, mechanical beeping sound pierced the fog in his mind. The sharp, sterile scent of bleach, alcohol, and iodine invaded his nostrils. Hospital. He was in a hospital. Izuku, oh God, my baby, please, please wake up. The voice was ragged, wet, and utterly broken. It was a sound of absolute despair. Izuku forced his heavy eyelids open. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the hospital room blinded him for a moment. As his vision swam into focus, the first thing he saw was a halo of messy green hair. Inko Midoriya was slumped over the side of his hospital bed, her face buried in the pristine white sheets. She was shaking violently, her sobs racking her small frame. She looked as though she had aged 10 years. Her eyes were red and swollen, dark circles carved deep into the skin beneath them. Mom. Izuku whispered. His voice was a dry, raspy croak. It felt like he was swallowing broken glass. Inko's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide, and a fresh wave of tears cascaded down her cheeks. She practically threw herself over him, being incredibly, terrifyingly careful not to touch his arms. Izuku! Oh, Izuku, you're awake! Thank God, thank God. She pressed her forehead against his chest, weeping uncontrollably. I was so scared. You've been asleep for 3 days, the doctor said, they said. She choked on her own words, unable to finish. Izuku swallowed hard, trying to clear his dry throat. He shifted slightly, attempting to reach out to comfort his mother. The moment he moved his shoulders, a scream ripped itself from his throat. It was a visceral, high-pitched shriek of pure, unadulterated torment. The pain that shot through his arms was so intense that his vision actually flashed white. He fell back against the pillows, hyperventilating, his small chest heaving as tears of absolute agony spilled from his eyes. Izuku! Don't move! Please, sweetheart, don't try to move! Inko cried, hovering her hands over him frantically, terrified to touch him. She reached over and slammed the nurse call button. As the white-hot pain slowly subsided back into a dull, throbbing roar, Izuku looked down at his body for the first time. Both of his arms, from the shoulders down to the tips of his fingers, were entombed in thick, heavy white plaster casts. They were elevated on specialized pillows, suspended in a highly calculated position. Steel pins jutted out from the casts near his elbows, holding the shattered bones together. His small chest was wrapped tightly in bandages, and in-4 drip was hooked into the back of his hand, one of the few places not covered in plaster. What happened? Izuku whimpered, his bottom lip trembling as the terror finally set in. He couldn't move his arms. He couldn't even feel his fingers properly. They just felt numb and swollen. Where's Kaken? Did he fall? Inko sobbed, gently stroking his hair with trembling fingers. Katsuki is fine, baby. He's fine. Not a scratch on him. You saved him. You caught him. Izuku blinked, the memories slowly filtering back through the fog of pain. The woods. The rotting log. Bakugo falling. The sudden, explosive surge of heat inside his chest. The green light. The sickening crunch. I used the quirk? Izuku asked, his voice small, a tiny spark of hope trying to ignite through the agonizing pain. I have a quirk? Before Inko could answer, the door to the hospital room swung open. A tall man in a crisp white lab coat walked in, followed closely by a nurse holding a thick clipboard. The doctor had a weary, deeply lined face, with graying hair and spectacles perched on the bridge of his nose. He looked at Izuku with an expression that the 4-year-old had never seen from an adult before. It wasn't the warm, encouraging look of a teacher. It wasn't the proud look of a parent. It was profound, heavy pity. Young Midoriya is awake, the doctor said, his voice soft and measured. He walked over to the side of the bed, picking up the chart from the end of the mattress. I am Dr. Tsubasa. How are you feeling, son? It hurts, Izuku whimpered honestly, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. My arms hurt really bad. Dr. Tsubasa sighed, a heavy, sorrowful sound. He glanced at Inko, who had clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle her crying. I have increased the dosage on his painkillers, Mrs. Midoriya, but with injuries of this magnitude, there will inevitably be breakthrough pain. The fact that he is conscious at all is a miracle. The doctor pulled up a chair and sat down next to the bed, looking directly into Izuku's eyes. Izuku, your mother and I need to talk to you about what happened in the woods. About your quirk. Izuku's heart fluttered despite the pain. A quirk. He really did have one. He wasn't going to be left behind. Is it a super strength quirk? Like All Might? He asked eagerly, his eyes wide. I moved so fast. I caught Kaken. Dr. Tsubasa exchanged a pained look with Inko. He adjusted his glasses, leaning forward. No, Izuku. It is not like All Might's. In fact, in all my years of studying quirk genetics, I have never seen anything quite like this. The doctor reached into a manila folder he had brought with him and pulled out a series of X-ray films. He held them up to the light of the window. Izuku gasped. Even a 4-year-old could tell that the X-rays were wrong. The bones in the arms depicted on the film didn't look like solid, smooth white lines. They looked like crushed gravel. They were splintered, fragmented, and fractured in dozens of different places. These are your arms, Izuku, Dr. Tsubasa said gently. When you brought Katsuki to the hospital, your mother gave us permission to run a full battery of genetic and physiological tests to understand what caused this catastrophic trauma. What we found, the doctor paused, choosing his words with agonizing care. What we found is both miraculous and terribly tragic. Izuku felt the cold grip of fear tighten around his stomach. Tragic. The human body is an incredible machine, Izuku, Dr. Tsubasa began, entering a slightly clinical tone to mask his own discomfort. But it is fragile. To prevent us from destroying our own muscles and bones, the human brain places limiters on our physical exertion. Normally, a person can only utilize about 20% of their muscles' true potential. If we used 100% all the time, our muscles would tear themselves off the bone, and our bones would snap under the strain. Izuku stared at him, unblinking, his sharp mind absorbing the information. Quirks that grant super strength, like the pro heroes you admire, come with secondary genetic mutations, the doctor explained. If a hero has a quirk that lets them lift a car, their body automatically develops ultra-dense bones, reinforced tendons, and hardened skin to handle that weight. It's a biological package deal. The doctor lowered the X-rays, his face grim. Your quirk, Izuku, did not come with a package deal. Inko let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands again. Your quirk is a highly specific, highly localized somatic mutation in your brain's motor cortex, Dr. Tsubasa continued softly. You have the ability to consciously, forcefully remove the brain's natural limiters. We've theorized based on the scans that there are multiple stages or gates to this limiter removal. In the woods, to save your friend, you instinctively forced open the very first gate. You unlocked 100% of your muscular capacity. Izuku looked down at his heavy, cast-bound arms. So, I am strong? For exactly 1 second, yes. You possess strength and speed that rivals a top-tier pro hero, the doctor said, but his voice was completely devoid of praise. It was heavy with doom. But Izuku, you only have the body of a normal 4-year-old boy. You do not have ultra-dense bones. You do not have reinforced tendons. Your quirk grants you godlike physical power, but your body is completely, utterly incapable of acting as a vessel for it. The doctor leaned closer, his expression deadly serious. When you opened that first gate, your muscles contracted with such violent force that they literally crushed your own bones from the inside out. Your heart rate spiked so high that you burst blood vessels across your chest. The kinetic recoil of catching Katsuki shattered whatever was left of your forearms. It will take months of intense physical therapy, multiple surgeries, and a lot of luck just to get you to hold a pencil again. Izuku felt the breath leave his lungs. The room seemed to spin. The monitors beeped in a steady, mocking rhythm. What does that mean? Izuku whispered, tears streaming down his face. Can I still be a hero? Inko wailed, unable to contain the grief that was tearing her apart. She reached out, gently resting her hand on Izuku's blanket-covered knee. Izuku, my poor baby. Dr. Tsubasa closed his eyes, taking a deep breath before delivering the final, crushing blow. Izuku, I am going to be very blunt with you, because your life depends on it. Your quirk is essentially a suicide button. The words hung in the sterile air, heavy and suffocating. If you ever use your quirk again, in the state your body is in right now, you will cripple yourself permanently, the doctor stated, his voice firm, brooking no argument. If you attempt to open a higher gate, if you try to push past that 100% threshold and tap into the deeper reserves of your body's energy, your muscles will liquefy. Your heart will explode. Your blood will literally boil. Dr. Tsubasa reached out and gently laid a hand on Izuku's shoulder. I am so sorry, young man. I know you dream of being a hero. But if you try to use this power to save people, you will die. You must never, ever activate your quirk again. The doctor stood up, gave Inko a respectful, sorrowful bow, and quietly exited the room, leaving the mother and son alone in the suffocating silence. Izuku Midoriya lay in the hospital bed, his arms crushed, his body broken, and his world entirely shattered. He stared up at the stark white ceiling panels, the doctor's words echoing in his mind like a death knell. A suicide button. If you use this power, you will die. He wasn't quirkless. It was almost worse than being quirkless. The universe had handed him the ultimate power, the strength he had begged for, the ability to save anyone with a single leap. And in the same breath, told him that using it was a death sentence. It was a cruel, cosmic joke. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in his young life, Izuku Midoriya wept not out of fear, but out of a profound, devastating despair. 2 months later, the summer heat had broken, giving way to the crisp, cool breezes of early autumn. The leaves in Muzurifu were turning brilliant shades of orange and red, signaling a season of change. Izuku Midoriya stood at the gates of his preschool, his small yellow backpack slung over one shoulder. He was a different boy than the one who had run excitedly into the woods in July. His arms were out of the plaster casts, but they were wrapped tightly in heavy athletic tape and compression sleeves to support the healing ligaments. He moved stiffly, guarding his upper body instinctively. His green eyes, once bright and overflowing with innocent optimism, were shadowed. There was a quiet, haunted weight behind them. Izuku! Inko knelt beside him, adjusting his collar. She looked at him with an expression of constant, agonizing worry. Ever since the hospital, she treated him like he was made of spun glass. Every time he stumbled, every time he bumped into a table, she would gasp and rush over, terrified he had broken something else. Are you sure you're ready to go back? Inko asked softly, smoothing his messy hair. We can wait another week. The physical therapist said you need to take it easy. I'm okay, Mom, Izuku said quietly, forcing a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. I want to see everyone, Inko sighed, kissing his forehead. Okay. But remember what Dr. Tsubasa said. No roughhousing. And absolutely, under no circumstances. I know, Mom. I won't use it. I promise. He walked through the gates and into the playground. The noise of children laughing, shouting, and showing off their quirks hit him like a physical blow. A boy was juggling rocks using telekinesis. A girl was blowing bubbles made of sparkling light. It was a vibrant, chaotic display of the superhuman society. And then, the playground went quiet. The children noticed him. They stopped playing, their eyes drawn to the heavy bandages on his arms, the stiffness of his posture. Whispers broke out like wildfire among the 4- and 5-year-olds. It's Midoriya. I heard he almost died. My mom said his quirk broke his own arms. He can't even use it. What a weirdo. Izuku kept his head down, his face burning with shame. He clutched the straps of his backpack, walking toward the sandbox. The pity in their eyes was suffocating. He preferred the days when they just thought he was a late bloomer. Now, he was the broken kid. The boy with the cursed quirk. Hey, Izuku stopped. Standing in his path, blocking his way to the sandbox, was Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo looked exactly the same, spiky blonde hair, hands shoved deep into his pockets, an arrogant scowl firmly planted on his face. But there was something different in his crimson eyes. When he looked at Izuku, there was a turbulent storm of emotions swirling beneath the surface. For 2 months, Bakugo had lived with the memory of falling. He had lived with the memory of looking up and seeing a terrifying, green glowing demon snatch him out of the air, only to realize it was the weak, timid boy who always followed him around. He remembered the sickening sound of Izuku's bones shattering to save his life. Bakugo was prideful. His entire worldview was built on the absolute certainty that he was the strongest, the best, the natural-born winner. Izuku saving him had shattered that worldview. It made Bakugo feel weak. It made him feel indebted. And Katsuki Bakugo did not know how to handle feeling indebted, especially to someone he viewed as inferior. The guilt of almost dying, of being the reason Izuku was mangled in a hospital bed for 2 months, festered inside his young mind. Unable to process the complex trauma, Bakugo's mind forcefully mutated that guilt into the only emotion he was comfortable with, aggression. Keikaken, Izuku said, managing a tentative, hopeful smile. Hi. I'm back. Bakugo stared at Izuku's bandaged arms. His jaw clenched tight, a tiny spark of a suppressed explosion popping against the fabric inside his pocket. He hated those bandages. He hated what they represented. He hated that Izuku had a power that was faster and stronger than his explosions, even if it broke him. You look like a mummy, Bakugo spat, his voice laced with venom. Izuku flinched, the smile dropping from his face. The doctor said I have to wear them for a while. My bones are still weak. Bakugo stepped closer, getting right into Izuku's personal space. He poked a finger hard into Izuku's chest, right where a fading purple bruise still lingered. Izuku winced in pain, stepping back. You think you're some kind of hero, huh? Bakugo snarled, his voice trembling slightly with an emotion he refused to acknowledge. You think you're better than me because you jumped off that cliff? No. Kaken, no, you were falling. I had to save you. Izuku pleaded, his eyes welling up with tears. My body just moved. I didn't need saving. Bakugo roared, the sheer volume of his voice making the surrounding children jump. Small explosions cracked off his palms, smoking in the cool autumn air. I would have been fine. I would have bounced off the rocks. I'm strong. You just got in my way. Izuku stared at him, bewildered and deeply hurt. He had shattered his own body to save his friend, and Bakugo was furious at him for it. Bakugo pointed a trembling, smoke-stained finger at Izuku's face. Your quirk is garbage. The doctors said you'll die if you use it again. It's a suicide button. You can't fight villains. You can't be a hero. You're just a danger to yourself. Bakugo took a step back, looking down his nose at the heartbroken green-haired boy. He needed to establish dominance. He needed to push Izuku down so he didn't have to look up at the boy who saved him. He looked at the characters in Izuku's name, Midoriya Izuku. The character for Aizu could also be read another way. You're totally useless, Bakugo declared loudly, making sure the entire playground could hear him. You're a defective doll. From now on, your name isn't Izuku. It's Deku. Because you're a worthless Deku who can't even use his own power without breaking. The playground erupted into cruel, mocking laughter. The other children, always eager to follow the strong alpha of the group, quickly picked up the chant. Deku! 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 Izuku stood frozen, the harsh laughter echoing in his ears, louder than the rushing river had been. He looked down at his bandaged arms, his trembling hands. Deku. The one who can't do anything. Bakugo turned his back on him, leading his entourage away toward the swings, leaving Izuku standing completely alone in the center of the playground. Izuku didn't cry. The tears simply refused to come. He felt hollowed out. A cold, heavy stone settled deep in his chest. Society had made its judgment. A quirk that breaks the user is not a heroic quirk. It's a tragedy. It's a joke. Later that evening, the Midoriya apartment was quiet. Inko was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, casting worried glances toward the hallway. Izuku was in his bedroom. The lights were off, the only illumination coming from the harsh blue glow of his computer monitor. The All Might posters on his walls were shadowed, their vibrant colors muted in the darkness. On the screen, a video was playing. It was an old, low-resolution clip of a disaster from years ago. A massive earthquake had triggered fires across the city, trapping dozens of people beneath rubble and twisted steel. The camera panned wildly, capturing the chaos, until a booming, boisterous laugh echoed over the sirens. Fear not, citizens! Hope has arrived! A massive figure landed in the center of the devastation. All Might, in his Silver Age costume, his muscles bulging, his iconic smile blindingly bright despite the ash and smoke. With a single, devastating punch, he shattered a concrete overpass that was pinning a bus, lifting it with effortless grace. Because I am here! Izuku sat in his desk chair, his knees pulled up to his chest, his bandaged arms resting on his shins. He had watched this video 10,000 times. It was the bedrock of his dream, but tonight, he watched it differently. He didn't just look at All Might's smile. He looked at the sheer, incomprehensible mass of the number one hero's muscles. He looked at the thickness of his arms, the trunk-like density of his legs. He looked at the way the ground cracked under All Might's feet when he landed, demonstrating the terrifying weight and density of a body built to house unimaginable power. Your quirk grants you godlike physical power, but your body is completely, utterly incapable of acting as a vessel for it. Dr. Tsubasa's words echoed in the dark room. Izuku reached out with a trembling, bandaged hand and touched the computer screen, resting his fingertips over All Might's massive, flexed bicep. His quirk wasn't a fire breath. It wasn't telekinesis. It wasn't explosions. His quirk was a key. A key that forcefully ripped open the floodgates of human potential, allowing a torrential, catastrophic flood of biological energy to run rampant through his system. The power wasn't the problem. The power was absolute. The problem was the vessel. If a normal human used 100% of their power, they broke. That was biology. But what if the human wasn't normal? What if the vessel was forged in iron? What if the muscles were conditioned, torn, and rebuilt so many thousands of times that they became as dense as steel cable? What if the bones were subjected to microfractures through years of relentless impact training, calcifying into pillars of titanium? If the body was weak, the quirk was a suicide button. But if the body was indestructible, the quirk was unmatched. Izuku slowly lowered his hand. He looked down at his own small, frail, heavily bandaged arms. He was 4 years old. He was tiny, he was weak, and right now, he was broken. Bakugo called him Deku. The doctor called him a tragedy. His mother looked at him like he was a dying patient. Tears finally breached his eyes, hot and stinging, spilling over his freckled cheeks and dropping onto his bandaged wrists. But he didn't sob. His face contorted not in despair, but in a fierce, gritty defiance that belonged on the face of a hardened veteran, not a preschooler. He wiped his eyes aggressively with his shoulder, wincing at the flare of pain in his collarbone. He embraced the pain. It was a reminder. A biological checkpoint. I won't die, Izuku whispered into the darkness of his bedroom, his voice trembling but laced with an absolute, unbreakable conviction. He looked back at the screen, at the symbol of peace saving people with a fearless smile. I won't be a tragedy. I won't be a Deku. He slowly uncurled from his chair and stood up. His legs felt shaky, his whole body aching with the dull, persistent throb of healing bones. He walked to the center of his room. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. Slowly, agonizingly, Izuku lowered himself to the floor. He placed his knees on the carpet. He gritted his teeth, his jaw locking tight as he brought his bandaged, trembling arms forward. He placed his palms flat on the floor, the pressure sending a white-hot spike of agony shooting straight up to his shoulders. He bit his lip so hard he tasted copper to keep from crying out. He straightened his legs. He was in a push-up position. His arms were shaking so violently it looked like he was vibrating. Every nerve ending in his upper body screamed at him to stop, warning him of the catastrophic damage he was risking. But Izuku didn't stop. He bent his elbows, lowering his small chest an inch toward the floor. The pain was blinding. "One," he whispered, his voice cracking, tears streaming down his face as he pushed himself back up. He lowered himself again. The tape on his arm strained. 2. It was a pathetic display. A 4-year-old boy with shattered arms, crying in the dark, barely able to move 2 inches down on a push-up. It was nothing, but it was the beginning. If his quirk demanded a toll of blood and bone, he would pay it. If he needed a vessel capable of holding the power of the gods, he would carve it out of his own flesh, day by agonizing day, year by excruciating year. He would build a body that could not be broken. He would master the 8 inner gates, or he would die trying. 3. Izuku gasped, collapsing onto the carpet, his chest heaving, his arms entirely spent. He lay there in the dark, panting, the taste of blood in his mouth and the fire of determination burning brilliantly in his emerald eyes. He was Izuku Midoriya. He had a suicidal quirk, and he was going to be the greatest hero the world had ever seen. 10 years. 3,650 days. That was how long it had been since Izuku Midoriya had felt the agonizing, intoxicating rush of his own quirk. 10 years since the day he had shattered his body to save Katsuki Bakugo. 10 years since a doctor had looked him in the eye and told him his own genetics were a death sentence. The alarm clock on his nightstand screamed into the pitch-black room. It was 3:30 a.m. A hand, heavily calloused and wrapped in frayed white athletic tape, shot out from beneath the dark green blanket and slammed down on the snooze button with the precision of a striking snake. 14-year-old Izuku Midoriya sat up in bed. There was no grogginess in his movements, no lethargic rubbing of the eyes. His body operated on a strict, militaristic biological clock forged through a decade of uncompromising discipline. He threw off the covers and stood up, his bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. In the dim light pouring through the window from the street lamps outside, the silhouette of the boy was entirely incongruous with his age. Izuku reached for the heavy iron switch on the wall, illuminating his room. The All Might posters were still there, though they were now framed and kept in pristine condition, flanked by anatomical charts of the human muscular and skeletal systems, diagrams of kinesiology, and martial arts manuals. He pulled off his sleeved shirt, tossing it onto his desk chair. If anyone from his middle school could see him now, they wouldn't recognize him. Underneath his baggy, oversized Aldera Junior High uniform, Izuku Midoriya hid a physique carved from granite. His shoulders were broad and heavily muscled, tapering down to a waist devoid of even a millimeter of excess body fat. His abdominals were defined like a washboard, his obliques cutting sharp lines down to his hips. His chest, arms, and back were crisscrossed with a tapestry of faint, thin, silvery scars, the physical receipts of pushing a human body far past its natural breaking point, tearing muscle fibers and microfracturing bones thousands of times over to force them to heal denser, thicker, and harder. He didn't have a normal quirk. He had a gate that opened into hell. And if he was going to walk through that gate, he needed a body made of iron. Izuku walked over to a corner of his room that had been converted into a makeshift gym. He didn't stretch. His body was already permanently primed. He strapped a 50-pound weighted vest tightly across his chest, the thick Velcro ripping loudly in the quiet room. He then strapped 10-pound iron weights to each of his ankles and 5-pound weights to his wrists. He dropped to the floor, placing only his first 2 knuckles against the rough, customized sandpaper mat he had glued to the floorboards. 1, Izuku whispered, his voice a low, gravelly hum in the silence. He lowered himself until his nose brushed the floor, then pushed up explosively. 2, he didn't just do push-ups. He did them until his muscles screamed, and then he considered that the true starting line. By the time he hit 500, a thick sheen of sweat coated his torso. By 1,000, his breath was a rhythmic, measured hiss escaping through his teeth. The pain was there, of course. A deep, agonizing burn that gnawed at his triceps and shoulders. But Izuku welcomed the pain. He greeted it like an old, familiar friend. The pain was the forge. By 5 a.m., he had finished his calisthenics. He moved to the kitchen, moving silently so as not to wake his mother. Inko Midoriya worried enough as it was. If she knew the true extent of the torture he put his body through daily, she would have a heart attack. He blended 6 raw eggs, a scoop of dry oats, spinach, and a chalky, unflavored protein powder into a thick, unappetizing sludge. He drank it in 3 large gulps, his face completely impassive, treating food purely as fuel, not as a source of pleasure. By 5:30 a.m., he was out the door. The streets of Mizurufu were empty, bathed in the pre-dawn blue light. Izuku began to run. He didn't jog. He sprinted, his heavily weighted body striking the pavement with heavy, rhythmic thuds. He ran 10 miles, charting a course that took him past Tagoba Municipal Beach, a horrific, towering illegal dumping ground of rusted metal and broken appliances. He would often stop there to punch the rusted hull of an old refrigerator until his knuckles bled, calcifying the bones in his hands. As the sun finally began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant shades of pink and gold, Izuku returned to his apartment, showered the sweat and blood away, and meticulously wrapped his hands and forearms in fresh white athletic tape. He put on his oversized black school uniform, completely swallowing his massive frame and making him look like the frail, timid boy everyone assumed he was. He grabbed his bright yellow backpack, gave his mother a kiss on the cheek, and walked out into the world. He was Izuku Midoriya. Society called him quirkless. They called him Deku, and he let them. Because the alternative was showing them the monster he kept locked inside his brain, and he wasn't ready to let the monster out. Not yet. Aldera Junior High was a loud, chaotic ecosystem of surging hormones and flashing quirks. To Izuku, it was just an obstacle course of noise. He sat at his desk near the back of the classroom, his posture rigid, his eyes focused on the notebook in front of him. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. His handwriting was tiny and hyper-detailed, sketching the biomechanics of a new pro-hero named MT Lady who had debuted that morning. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your futures. Mr. Suzuki, their homeroom teacher, announced, slamming a stack of career aptitude forms onto his podium. I'll pass out these handouts for your future plans now, but... The teacher suddenly snatched the papers up and threw them into the air like confetti. You're all pretty much planning to go into the hero course, right? The classroom erupted. Desks were shoved aside as students leaped to their feet, cheering and activating their quirks in a blatant display of rule-breaking. A girl elongated her neck to the ceiling, a boy shot jets of water from his fingertips, and another manifested glowing rocks from his scalp. Izuku didn't move. He simply kept writing, his mechanical pencil scratching quietly against the paper. He didn't need to show off. He knew his path. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks. Mr. Suzuki laughed, holding his hands up. But using your powers in school is against the rules. Settle down, sensei. Don't lump me in with these losers. The booming, arrogant voice cut through the noise like a scythe. The entire class fell silent, turning their attention to the front row. Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, his feet propped disrespectfully up on his desk. He had grown taller, his frame lean and incredibly athletic, his spiky ash-blonde hair practically radiating aggressive energy. He smirked, looking back at his classmates with utter disdain. I'm not gonna be stuck at the bottom with the rest of these rejects. They'll be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. I'm the real deal. The class erupted in offended shouts. You think you're better than us, Bakugo? Get over yourself. Bring it on, extras. Bakugo roared back, a dangerous, crackling explosion popping from his palm, instantly silencing the dissenters. Ah, Bakugo, you're aiming for UA High, aren't you? The teacher noted, looking at a clipboard. A collective gasp swept through the room. UA High School. The pinnacle of hero education in Japan. Its acceptance rate was an abysmal 0.2%. It was where All Might had gone. That's exactly why you guys are just stepping stones. Bakugo declared, jumping up onto his desk, his chest puffed out in supreme confidence. I aced all the mock tests. I'm the only one at this school who could possibly get into UA. I'll surpass All Might and become the top hero, and my name will be etched in gold. Oh, right, the teacher said, adjusting his glasses and looking back at his clipboard. Midoriya wants to go to UA too. The silence that followed was absolute. For 2 agonizing seconds you could hear a pin drop in the classroom. Then, the room exploded in a chorus of mocking, cruel laughter. Midoriya? No way. You can't get into the hero course just by studying. He practically doesn't even have a quirk. What's he gonna do, bleed on the villains? Izuku didn't look up. He felt the familiar, heavy weight of their collective scorn wash over him. He kept his eyes glued to his notebook, his hand tightening imperceptibly around his pencil. Crack! The plastic casing of the pencil fractured slightly under his grip. He instantly relaxed his fingers, letting the tension bleed away into the floor. Discipline. They got rid of the rule that says you need a strong quirk to take the exam. Izuku said, his voice quiet but steady. It's not impossible. Before he could finish his sentence, a violent, deafening explosion ripped across his desk. The shockwave blasted Izuku's notebook out of his hands and sent his desk violently backward. Izuku didn't flinch. His body, trained to withstand massive kinetic impact, absorbed the shockwave effortlessly. He simply slid back with the desk, his eyes darting up to meet the furious crimson gaze of Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo stood over him, his hands smoking. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a seething, irrational rage. For 10 years, Bakugo had held a monopoly on power. But whenever he looked at Izuku, he didn't see the weak, broken 4-year-old in the hospital bed. He saw the phantom of a green glowing demon that was faster and stronger than him. And worse, Izuku never fought back. Izuku just took the abuse, quiet and stoic, carrying himself with a heavy, unspoken burden that Bakugo couldn't comprehend. It drove Bakugo insane. It felt like Izuku was looking down on him. "Listen up, Deku!" Bakugo snarled, slamming his smoking palm down on the scarred wood of Izuku's desk. "You're even worse than these damn rejects. You're a liability. You have a quirk that breaks your own bones. You'd be dead in 5 seconds in the real world. What the hell can you even do?" Izuku looked up at Bakugo. He looked at the smoking palm, at the angry, defensive posture. Izuku knew, with absolute, mathematical certainty, that if he wanted to, he could reach out, grab Bakugo's wrist, and snap his arm like a dry twig before the blonde could even blink. He didn't even need the first gate to do it. A decade of carrying 300 pounds of weight daily had made Izuku's base physical strength monstrous. But Izuku didn't move. He looked at Bakugo with calm, deep green eyes. I want to try Kaken. I've always wanted to be a hero. It's my dream." Bakugo scoffed, a dark, ugly sound. He snatched Izuku's notebook off the floor. "Hero analysis for the future? Give me a break." With a swift, cruel motion, Bakugo clapped his hands together with the notebook between them. A sharp explosion echoed in the classroom. He held up the charred, smoking remains of the notebook. Izuku's stoic facade cracked just a fraction. "That's mean." Bakugo tossed the ruined notebook out the open third-story window. "Most top-tier heroes have stories about their school days. I want the story of how I'm the only student from this garbage public middle school to ever make it into UA. So, here's some advice, Deku." Bakugo leaned in close, his voice dropping to a harsh, mocking whisper. "If you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it. Pray that you'll be born with a quirk that actually works in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of the building." The classroom went dead silent. Even Bakugo's lackeys looked slightly uncomfortable. That was crossing a line. Izuku sat perfectly still. He slowly stood up from his chair. Despite his slouched posture, he was a few inches taller than Bakugo. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The quiet, intense pressure radiating from Izuku's silence was palpable. Bakugo felt a sudden, instinctual chill run down his spine. He immediately sparked small explosions in his palms, glaring up at Izuku, his fight-or-flight response kicking in. "What? You got something to say?" Izuku looked at the sparking hands. He looked at the fear hiding behind Bakugo's rage. Izuku slowly let out a breath. The pressure vanished. He slouched his shoulders, returning to the role of the timid, harmless Deku. "No," Izuku muttered, turning away. He didn't need to fight Bakugo. He had bigger monsters to conquer. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent as Izuku walked alone through the quiet, residential streets of Mizurufu. He had retrieved his ruined notebook from the school's koi pond, patting it dry with a towel. The pages were scorched and waterlogged, his meticulous notes smeared, but the information was locked safely inside his mind. He walked through a dark, concrete underpass beneath a major train line. The shadows were deep here, the air smelling of damp earth and stale urine. Izuku walked with his head down, deep in thought. Bakugo's words echoed in his head, a cruel, persistent loop. Take a swan dive. Izuku wasn't suicidal. Not even close. But the sheer isolation of his existence weighed heavily on him. He had spent 10 years torturing his own body, preparing for a dream that everyone told him was impossible. What if he was wrong? What if Dr. Tsubasa had been right? What if he opened the gate and his heart exploded, regardless of how strong his muscles were? Gurgle. The sound was strange. Wet, shifting, and massive. Izuku stopped dead in his tracks. His hyper-trained senses, honed to detect minute shifts in his own body's biomechanics, instantly recognized the unnatural displacement of air behind him. He spun around. Rising from a metal manhole cover in the center of the tunnel was a nightmare. It was a massive, shifting amalgamation of putrid, dark green sludge. The mud writhed and bubbled, forming a vaguely humanoid upper body with two massive, bulbous eyes and a jagged mouth filled with crooked, rotten teeth. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, the sludge villain hissed, its voice wet and gurgling. Perfect. I was running out of time. The villain lunged. A normal middle schooler would have frozen in terror. A normal human would have been engulfed instantly. Izuku Midoriya was not normal. His reflexes, sharpened by dodging mechanized batting cage pitches at 70 miles per hour from point-blank range, kicked in instantly. Izuku ducked, pivoting on his right heel and rolling out of the way just as a massive tendril of thick, suffocating sludge slammed into the concrete where he had been standing, cracking the pavement. Oh! The sludge villain turned, its eyes widening in surprise. You're a fast one. But it won't matter. The villain exploded outward, shooting a dozen tendrils of slime in every direction, completely blocking off the tunnel's exits. Izuku backed up, his back hitting the cold concrete wall. He was trapped. Don't worry, the villain purred, sliding toward him. I'm just going to hijack your body. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then, it'll all be over. A wave of sludge crashed over Izuku, slamming him against the wall and instantly enveloping his lower body, chest, and arms. The sheer weight of the mud was immense, like being buried alive in wet cement. The sludge rushed up toward his face, aiming for his mouth and nose to force its way into his lungs. Izuku clamped his mouth shut, sealing his lips tight. He took a shallow breath through his nose just before the sludge covered his face completely. He was entirely encased in the villain's body. Suffocation, Izuku thought, his mind racing with clinical detachment despite the panic attempting to claw its way up his throat. He's a fluid. Blunt force is ineffective. I need to break his hold. The villain laughed, the sound vibrating through the mud pressing against Izuku's ears. Stop struggling. You can't breathe. Just let it happen. Izuku opened his eyes beneath the sludge. It stung, but he needed to see. He flexed his arms. The sludge was thick, dense, and possessed an incredibly strong adhesive quality. Izuku didn't panic. He planted his feet firmly against the ground. He tightened his core, drawing on the immense, terrifying reservoir of raw physical strength he had built. He didn't activate his quirk. He just used the muscles he had forged in the dark. With a muffled, guttural grunt, Izuku pulled his arms outward. The sludge villain gasped. What kind of strength is this? The mud surrounding Izuku's arms began to stretch and tear. Izuku's biceps bulged beneath his school uniform, the fabric ripping at the seams. He was slowly, agonizingly prying the fluid apart purely through kinetic leverage. He managed to rip his right arm free, the mud snapping back like thick rubber. He reached up to tear the sludge away from his face, desperate for oxygen. His lungs were beginning to burn. Suddenly, the manhole cover at the end of the tunnel blasted into the air, spinning like a coin before clattering loudly against the concrete. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed in the tunnel. The ground itself seemed to tremble with each step. Fear not, kid! A booming voice, a voice Izuku had heard in his dreams 10,000 times, filled the underpass. It radiated absolute, unshakable confidence. The sludge villain shrieked, whipping around. All Might? Standing in the entrance of the tunnel, illuminated by the afternoon sun behind him, was the towering, impossible figure of the symbol of peace. He was massive, his muscles stretching the fabric of his white t-shirt to its absolute limit, a bag of groceries clutched in one hand. Texas smash! All Might pulled his fist back and threw a punch at the empty air. He didn't even make contact with the villain. The sheer, unfathomable kinetic force generated by the speed and weight of All Might's arm displaced the air in the tunnel so violently that it created a localized hurricane. The wind pressure hit the sludge villain like a freight train. The fluid structure of the villain's body instantly disintegrated under the pressure, exploding into a million droplets of slime. The wind tore the sludge entirely off Izuku, slamming the boy backward against the wall as a gale-force wind howled through the underpass. Izuku gasped, dropping to his hands and knees, sucking in massive, greedy lungfuls of air. He coughed violently, expelling a small amount of sludge that had coated his lips. He looked up through his messy green bangs. Standing over him, backlit by the sunlight, was a literal god among men. All Might. Thought we lost you there. All Might boomed, flashing a smile that could blind a man. Are you alright, young man? Apologies for getting you caught up in my villain hunting. I usually don't make mistakes like this. But I'm fired up in a new city. All Might produced 2 large plastic soda bottles from his grocery bag and began rapidly scooping up the scattered, incapacitated pieces of the sludge villain, stuffing them inside and capping them tight. Izuku couldn't speak. His mind had completely blue-screened. The man who had been the focal point of his entire existence, the reason he broke his body every single day, was standing right in front of him. Well, I've got to get this guy to the police, All Might said, patting his pockets to ensure the bottles were secure. Stay safe out there, kid. All Might turned, bending his knees to prepare for a jump that would carry him across the city. Wait, Izuku's mind screamed. He's leaving. I haven't asked him the question. The only question that matters. Izuku scrambled to his feet. He didn't think. He just moved. As All Might launched himself into the air, the concrete shattering beneath his boots, Izuku lunged forward, grabbing onto the hero's thick, muscular leg. Whoa, whoa, whoa! All Might shouted, looking down in shock as they rapidly ascended into the sky, the wind whipping violently around them. Hey, let go! Your fanaticism is too much. If you let go now, you'll die. If I let go now, I'll die. Izuku screamed back, his eyes watering from the wind pressure. All Might sighed, a drop of blood suddenly escaping the corner of his mouth, a detail Izuku, in his panic, missed entirely. Fine. Just close your eyes and hold on. A few moments later, they landed with a heavy thud on the roof of a tall commercial building. Izuku collapsed onto his knees, trembling violently. He wasn't afraid of the height. He was terrified of the moment. This was it. Good grief, All Might sighed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. If you knock on the door, someone will let you downstairs. Now I really must be going. Wait! Izuku shouted, extending his hand. Please, just one question. No time! All Might said, stepping toward the edge of the roof. Can I be a hero? Izuku's voice broke, the desperation of 10 years pouring into the words. Even if my quirk destroys my own body? All Might stopped. He didn't turn around, but his massive shoulders stiffened. Izuku stared at the hero's broad back, his heart hammering against his ribs. When I was 4, I used my quirk to save someone. It shattered both of my arms. The doctors told me that if I ever use my full power, it will act like a suicide button. My body can't handle the strain of my own power. Everyone tells me I should give up. They call me useless. They say I'll just die. Izuku clenched his fists, the knuckles turning white. But I've trained for 10 years. I've broken my bones and rebuilt my muscles. I want to save people with a fearless smile, just like you. Can someone like me, can a boy with a cursed quirk, become a hero like you? Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the answer. When silence met his plea, he slowly opened his eyes. The towering, muscular god was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man with sunken, shadowed eyes, a sharp jawline, and oversized clothes hanging off his bony frame. He looked like a corpse. Izuku shrieked, scrambling backward. What? Where did All Might go? You're an imposter. The skeletal man let out a wet, rattling sigh, sliding down to sit against the rooftop railing. I assure you, kid. I am All Might. He coughed, a splatter of blood hitting the concrete. You know how guys at the pool suck in their gut to look buff? It's like that. Izuku stared, his mind unable to process the shattered illusion. A fake? The symbol of peace is a hollow shell, All Might finished quietly, his voice lacking all of its previous bravado. It was just a tired, broken man speaking. He lifted the hem of his oversized white shirt. Izuku gasped. Covering the entirety of All Might's left side was a massive, horrific, purple, and red scar. It looked like the flesh had been scooped out and haphazardly burned shut. It was a wound that no human should have survived. 5 years ago, All Might said, his voice grim. An enemy attacked me. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed, and my stomach was completely removed. I've had repeated surgeries, but the damage is permanent. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. The rest of the time, I look like this. Izuku felt the blood drain from his face. The invincible god was dying. I smiled to show the pressure of heroes and to trick the fear inside of me, All Might said, looking out over the city skyline. Pros are always risking their lives. It's a dangerous, bloody, terrible job. And you? All Might turned his sunken blue eyes to Izuku. The pity in them was identical to the look Dr. Tsubasa had given him 10 years ago. It cut Izuku to the bone. You have a power that destroys you, All Might said softly. You said it yourself? A suicide button. Kid, being a hero is hard enough when you have a body made of steel. If your own power is trying to kill you before the villains even touch you, you're a liability. Izuku felt a cold, numbing sensation spread through his chest. I cannot, in good conscience, tell you that you can become a hero, All Might said, delivering the fatal blow to Izuku's dream. It's not bad to dream. But you have to consider what's realistic. If you want to help people, become a police officer. They get mocked for taking custody of villains, but it's a fine profession. Just don't throw your life away, kid. All Might stood up, walking toward the rooftop access door. Make sure you knock on the door so they let you down. The heavy metal door clicked shut. Izuku stood alone on the roof. The wind howled around him, chilling the sweat on his skin. He looked down at his calloused, scarred hands. 10 years. Thousands of hours of pain. Millions of push-ups. Rivers of sweat. All for nothing. The greatest hero in the world had just confirmed what everyone else had already said. He was broken. A vessel built for nothing. Izuku walked mechanically down the stairs of the building, his mind entirely blank. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel sad. He just felt an overwhelming, crushing emptiness. He exited the building and began to walk home. He didn't know how long he walked. He was a ghost haunting his own life. Boom! A massive explosion shattered the afternoon quiet, sending a shockwave rattling through the windows of the street. Plumes of thick, black smoke began to rise into the sky a few blocks away. Izuku's feet moved automatically, carrying him toward the commotion. It was a habit ingrained in his very soul. Run to the danger, take notes, learn. He pushed his way through a large crowd of onlookers that had gathered at the edge of the Tatooine shopping district. The street was a war zone. Fires raged out of control, engulfing storefronts and shattering glass. The heat was oppressive, and in the center of the inferno, towering over the street, was the sludge villain. Izuku froze, his eyes widening in horror. He escaped? But All Might had him. Wait. The bottles. Did I cause him to drop them when I grabbed his leg? This is my fault. Guilt, heavy and suffocating, crashed down on Izuku. He looked around frantically. The pro-heroes were there, but they were doing nothing. Death Arms, a hero with massive muscular strength, was shouting at the crowd to get back. Kamui Woods was spraying water, unable to get close due to the fires. Empty Lady was standing on the periphery, complaining that she didn't have enough room to grow to her giant size without destroying the buildings. Why aren't they attacking? A civilian yelled. He's got a hostage. Another replied. Some kid with an explosive quirk. The villain is using him to create all these fires. Nobody can get close. Izuku's breath hitched. He stepped forward, peering through the smoke and the flames. Trapped deep within the suffocating mass of dark green sludge was a boy in an Aldera junior high uniform. The boy was thrashing violently, setting off massive explosions from his palms in a desperate, panicked attempt to break free, but it was only feeding the fires around them. The mud shifted, revealing the boy's face for a split second, crimson eyes, wide with absolute, suffocating terror. It was Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku's heart stopped. The world around him seemed to mute. The roaring flames, the shouting heroes, the screaming civilians, it all faded into a dull, underwater hum. He saw Bakugo's eyes. It was the exact same look Bakugo had given him 10 years ago, right before he fell off the log. It was a silent, desperate scream for help. He's going to die. The thought was clear and absolute. The heroes were waiting for someone with a suitable quirk. All Might was out of time. Bakugo's lungs were filling with sludge. In less than a minute, he would be dead. Izuku didn't make a conscious decision. Just like in the woods 10 years ago, his body moved on its own. Izuku burst from the crowd, sprinting past the police barricade and directly into the inferno. Hey! Stop! You idiot! Get back here! Death Arms roared, reaching out to grab him, but Izuku was already too fast. Izuku sprinted toward the towering villain, his mind operating at a hyper-accelerated speed. I can't just punch the fluid. I proved that in the tunnel. To displace this much mass, I need kinetic force far beyond human capability. I need wind pressure. He knew what he needed. And he knew what it would cost him. I'm sorry, Mom. Izuku dug his heels into the burning asphalt, his heavily weighted muscles flexing as he prepared for the jump. He closed his eyes. He reached deep into the architecture of his own brain, bypassing the survival instincts, tearing down the neurological walls that kept a human being safe. He found the lock. And he shattered it. The first gate, the gate of opening. It was a sensation he hadn't felt in 10 years, but it was exactly as agonizing as he remembered. An explosive, catastrophic surge of bioelectrical energy erupted from his nervous system. The limiters on his muscular capacity were violently eradicated. His heart rate instantaneously jumped to 300 beats per minute, pumping blood with such ferocious pressure that the veins on his neck, arms, and temples bulged, threatening to burst. His skin rapidly flushed a deep, furious crimson red. A visible shockwave of energy blasted outward from Izuku's body, extinguishing the immediate fires around him. A vibrant, volatile green aura erupted around him, his own sweat evaporating instantly off his burning skin. The pain was unimaginable. It felt as though every individual muscle fiber in his body was being stretched over a hot coal and pulled until it snapped. But this time, his body did not shatter. 10 years of torturous, relentless conditioning held the line. His bones, calcified and dense as steel, absorbed the pressure. His tendons, thickened by millions of repetitions, strained but did not break. He was a vessel holding a star. Izuku opened his eyes. They glowed with a terrifying, radiant green energy. He moved. To the heroes in the crowd, Izuku simply disappeared. The asphalt beneath his feet cratered violently, exploding into chunks of shrapnel. He was in the air, directly in front of the sludge villain's massive eye. In less than a microsecond, the sludge villain didn't even have time to register his presence. Bakugo, suffocating in the mud, saw a flash of red skin and glowing green light. Izuku pulled his right arm back. His bicep bulged to an unnatural, monstrous size, the fabric of his school uniform shredding instantly. He focused every ounce of 100% of his muscular capacity into his fist. He aimed not for the fluid, but for the air in front of the fluid. Izuku threw the punch. The speed of his fist broke the sound barrier. A sharp, deafening crack echoed across the city block. The air in front of Izuku's knuckles compressed violently, igniting from the sheer friction before exploding outward in a devastating, localized hurricane of wind pressure. The shockwave tore through the street. The remaining fires were blown out instantly, the windows of the surrounding buildings shattering from the acoustic blast. The sludge villain didn't just break apart. It was violently, explosively atomized by the sheer kinetic force of the air pressure. The villain's scream was cut short as its body was scattered across 3 city blocks in a rain of foul-smelling mist. Bakugo, freed from the sludge, was caught in the residual wind, tumbling backward through the air. Izuku, mid-air, reached out with his left hand and snatched Bakugo by the collar of his uniform, halting his momentum instantly. Izuku landed. His feet hit the asphalt, skidding backward and tearing 2 deep trenches into the road before coming to a complete stop. He stood tall, the green aura flaring wildly around his crimson skin. The entire street was completely, utterly silent. The heroes, the police, the civilians, they all stared in absolute, paralyzing shock at the crimson-skinned boy radiating green energy in the center of the devastated street. Izuku held Bakugo by the collar. He looked down at his own right arm. He had held the first gate open for a total of 1.5 seconds. The aura vanished. The red flush rapidly faded from his skin, and then, the bill came due. Izuku dropped to his knees, a horrific, blood-curdling scream tearing from his throat. His right arm, the one he had used to throw the punch, went entirely limp. The pain was apocalyptic. The muscles in his bicep and forearm had torn severely, the violent contractions snapping several key ligaments. A hairline fracture spiderwebbed up his radius bone. It wasn't completely shattered like when he was 4, but it was broken, mangled, and screaming in agony. He collapsed onto the asphalt, clutching his ruined arm to his chest, gasping for air as the adrenaline crashed, leaving him completely vulnerable. Bakugo sat on the ground a few feet away, coughing violently, his crimson eyes wide and blown out as he stared at the boy writhing in pain. He did it again. That power. That cursed, destructive power. Suddenly, the crowd erupted into cheers. The villain was defeated. The hostage was safe. But the pro-heroes were furious. Death Arms and Kamui Woods marched over to Izuku, who was still kneeling on the ground, struggling to breathe through the pain. "What the hell were you thinking, kid?" Death Arms yelled, grabbing Izuku by his uninjured shoulder. "You could have been killed. You completely bypassed the police barricade and recklessly unleashed a highly destructive quirk in a populated area. Do you have any idea how much damage you could have caused? That was suicidal." Kamui Woods agreed, scowling. "Leave the hero work to the professionals. You just made a dangerous situation incredibly volatile." Izuku kept his head down, cradling his broken arm. He didn't defend himself. He knew they were right. He had opened the gate. He had broken himself again. It was just a matter of degree now. Meanwhile, a few feet away, MT Lady and several paramedics were praising Bakugo. "That was an incredible quirk you have, young man," a paramedic said, checking his vitals. "You held out against that monster for so long. When you become a pro, you'll be amazing." Bakugo ignored them entirely. His eyes were locked onto Izuku's hunched, trembling form as the other heroes berated him. Izuku was eventually let go with a stern warning and heavily wrapped bandages on his right arm from the paramedics. He declined a trip to the hospital, knowing exactly what the X-rays would show and not wanting to face Dr. Tsubasa again. The sun had fully set by the time Izuku began the slow, agonizing walk home. The adrenaline was completely gone, leaving him exhausted, his arm throbbing with a dull, sickening pain. He felt entirely defeated. He had proved All Might right. He had proved Bakugo right. His power was a weapon of self-destruction. 10 years of training had only upgraded his durability from shattered to severely torn. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. "Deku!" Izuku stopped, turning around slowly. Katsuki Bakugo was standing at the end of the street, panting slightly, having clearly run to catch up with him. Bakugo's face was a twisted mask of complex, conflicting emotions. Rage, confusion, guilt, and a deep, deeply buried sense of awe. "Kaken!" Izuku muttered quietly. Bakugo stomped forward, stopping a few feet away. He pointed a trembling finger at Izuku. "Listen to me, you damn nerd!" Bakugo shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't ask for your help. I didn't need saving. I was fine on my own. Don't you dare think you're better than me just because you blew that sludge freak away. You broke your damn arm again, you idiot. You're still a reckless, suicidal Deku. Don't you look down on me." Bakugo didn't wait for an answer. He spun on his heel and stormed off into the night, leaving Izuku standing alone. Izuku watched him go, a small, tired smile touching his lips. It was Bakugo's twisted, aggressive way of saying thank you. Izuku turned to continue his walk home, his head bowed. "I am here!" Izuku jumped, crying out in pain as his arm jostled, as a massive figure slid out from a side alley, striking a heroic pose that completely blocked the sidewalk. "All Might." Izuku stared, bewildered. "All Might? What are you doing here? How did you escape the press?" All Might laughed boisterously. "Ha! Evading the press is a piece of cake for the symbol of blurg." The facade broke instantly. A geyser of blood erupted from All Might's mouth, and in a puff of steam, the muscular god vanished, replaced once again by the skeletal, coughing man. All Might wiped his mouth, leaning against a brick wall for support. He looked at Izuku, his sunken blue eyes intense and serious. Young man. I came to thank you? And to apologize. Izuku blinked. Apologize? If you hadn't told me about your life, if you hadn't rushed into that fire, I would have been a worthless bystander, All Might said, his voice thick with shame. I lectured you about being realistic, but I was the one who gave up. I saw that villain, the one I dropped, suffocating that boy, and I hesitated. I told myself I was out of time. I made an excuse. All Might pushed himself off the wall, walking slowly toward Izuku. But you, a boy with a quirk that tears his own body apart, a boy who had been told by everyone that his dream was impossible, you didn't hesitate for a second. Your body moved before you even had a chance to think. Izuku's breath hitched. Tears, hot and unbidden, finally began to well up in his eyes. The top heroes always have stories about their school days, All Might said softly, echoing the words Bakugo had mocked him with earlier that day. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. A tear slipped down Izuku's cheek, carving a clean line through the soot and dirt on his face. That was true for you today, wasn't it? All Might asked gently. Izuku fell to his knees, no longer able to support his own weight. He bowed his head, the dam finally breaking. 10 years of isolation, pain, mockery, and despair poured out of him in ragged, agonizing sobs. He cried for the 4-year-old boy in the hospital bed. He cried for the thousands of hours spent in the dark. He cried because, for the first time in his life, someone saw him. You can become a hero, All Might declared, his voice ringing with absolute, unshakable certainty. Izuku sobbed, clutching his chest with his uninjured hand, weeping openly on the sidewalk. Those were the words. The words he had been dying to hear his entire life. All Might stood over him, watching the boy cry. He saw the ruined arm, the shredded uniform revealing the incredibly dense, scarred muscles beneath. He saw a vessel that had been forged in the fires of absolute determination. I was wrong about you on the roof, All Might said quietly. I looked at your quirk and saw a liability. But I didn't look at you. I didn't see the work you put in. That punch you threw. The sheer density of your muscles absorbed force that would have atomized a normal human. You built a vessel. Izuku sniffled, looking up at the skeletal hero through blurry eyes. Your quirk is terrifying, All Might said honestly. To remove the body's limiters is to play with death. If you continue down this path alone, you will eventually hit a gate you cannot survive. You need guidance. You need a master who understands the biomechanics of absolute power. All Might crouched down, bringing himself eye level with Izuku. I cannot give you my quirk, young Midoriya. My power, one for all, requires a vessel entirely unburdened by internal conflict. It would clash with your inner gates and destroy you instantly. All Might placed a large, bony hand on Izuku's uninjured shoulder. But I can give you everything else. I know what it takes to wield a power that destroys the user. I know how to condition the body to survive the impossible. I offer you this, Izuku Midoriya. Let me be your master. Let me train you. Izuku stared into All Might's eyes. The hero wasn't pitying him. He was challenging him. We have 10 months until the UA entrance exams, All Might said, a fierce, intense smile spreading across his skeletal face. I will push you harder than you have ever been pushed. We will forge your bones into diamond and your muscles into steel. We will build a vessel capable of holding the 8 inner gates without breaking. Izuku looked down at his broken arm. He felt the throbbing pain. He felt the exhaustion. He looked back up at All Might, his green eyes burning with a fire that eclipsed the inferno he had just walked out of. He wiped the tears from his face with the back of his hand. Yes, Izuku said, his voice trembling but resolute. Please teach me. All Might grinned. Then rest up for the next few days, kid. Because starting Monday, I'm going to put you through hell. Dr. Tsubasa stared at the backlit X-ray film clipped to the light board, his aged face a mask of profound, unadulterated bewilderment. He pushed his spectacles up the bridge of his nose, leaning in so close that his breath fogged the plastic. I don't understand, the doctor muttered, shaking his head. 14-year-old Izuku Midoriya sat on the examination table, his right arm resting in a temporary sling. His mother Inko stood beside him, her hands wringing nervously in the fabric of her skirt. It had been 3 days since the incident with the sludge villain. 3 days since Izuku had unleashed the first gate and punched a hurricane into existence. Is it bad, Doctor? Inko asked, her voice trembling. Did he shatter them again? Dr. Tsubasa slowly turned around, his eyes locking onto Izuku. The pity that had been present in the doctor's eyes 10 years ago was entirely gone. It had been replaced by something resembling clinical awe. No, Mrs. Midoriya, Dr. Tsubasa said, tapping the film with a pen. He didn't shatter them. And biologically speaking, that is impossible. The doctor walked over to a filing cabinet, pulling out a dusty, 10-year-old manila folder. He extracted the X-rays from when Izuku was 4 years old and clipped them onto the light board next to the current ones. The contrast was horrifying. The 4-year-old bones looked like crushed gravel. The 14-year-old bones looked solid, thick, and bright white, save for a single, distinct hairline fracture spiraling up the radius, and shadows indicating severely strained, but intact, ligaments. When you were 4, Izuku, your quirk exerted a force that liquefied your skeletal structure, Dr. Tsubasa explained, tracing the new X-ray. 2 days ago, you exerted a force exponentially greater than that. Based on the seismic reports and the structural damage to the Tatooine shopping district, the kinetic output of your punch was equivalent to a localized bomb. By all medical logic, your right arm should have been atomized. It should be gone. Instead, you have a moderate hairline fracture and a grade 2 muscle tear. The doctor leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Izuku, what have you been doing for the last 10 years? Izuku looked down at his lap. Working out. Working out? Dr. Tsubasa let out a breathy, incredulous laugh. Kid bodybuilders workout. Pro heroes workout. You have fundamentally altered your own bone density. Your skeletal structure is calcified to a degree I've only seen in individuals with dedicated, hardening-type mutation quirks. The microfractures in your bones have healed over themselves thousands of times. You didn't just work out. You put your body through a decade-long crucible of continuous, calculated trauma. Inko gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she looked at her son in horror. Izuku, you promised me you wouldn't push yourself. I didn't use the quirk, Mom, Izuku said softly, looking up at her with earnest green eyes. I needed to build a vessel. Just in case, Dr. Tsubasa sighed, rubbing his temples. Well, you built one? Your arm will heal in 3 weeks. But Izuku, listen to me very carefully. You survived the first gate because of your physical conditioning, but your ligaments are still human. They are the weak link. If you continue to use this power recklessly, your muscles will literally rip themselves off the bone. You have to learn control, or you will end up a double amputee before you graduate high school. I understand, Doctor, Izuku said, and for the first time in his life, there was no fear in his voice. I'm going to learn control. I have a teacher now. The smell hit him first. It was a putrid, suffocating amalgamation of rotting kelp, rusted iron, stagnant salt water, and decaying plastic. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was a tragedy. Once a beautiful, pristine stretch of coastline, shifting ocean currents had turned it into a dumping ground. Over the years, illegal dumpers had taken advantage of the isolation, piling the beach high with broken refrigerators, rusted-out cars, shattered televisions, and mountains of industrial scrap. It was a monument to societal neglect. Izuku stood at the top of the concrete seawall, looking out over the sprawling, jagged ocean of garbage. The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows through the towers of trash. It's a beautiful morning, isn't it? Izuku jumped as all might, in his towering, heavily muscled prime form, landed on top of a rusted washing machine with an earth-shaking thud. The hero flashed his trademark blinding smile, striking a pose that strained the fabric of his white t-shirt. All might. Izuku practically vibrated with excitement. His right arm was still wrapped tightly in medical tape and a brace, but the rest of his body was humming with adrenaline. You can just call me Tashinori when we're in private, my boy, All Might said, deflating instantly in a puff of steam. The massive hero shrank down into the skeletal, coughing form of Tashinori Yagi. He stepped off the washing machine, pulling a thick stack of papers from his oversized cargo pants. Welcome to your personal hell, young Midoriya, Toshinori said, his sunken eyes sweeping over the mountain of garbage. For the next 10 months, this beach is your dojo, your gym, and your crucible. Izuku looked at the millions of tons of scrap metal. You want me to clean it? I want you to conquer it, Toshinori corrected. He handed Izuku the stack of papers. When I initially planned to train a successor, I drew up the American Dream Plan, a physical conditioning regimen designed to take a normal teenager and turn them into a suitable vessel for super strength. But after reviewing the medical files you brought me, and seeing your current physique, I had to throw that plan in the trash. Toshinori tapped the papers in Izuku's hands. That is the 8 Gates vessel plan. I spent the last 3 days consulting with underground sports physiologists and biomechanical experts. We are no longer building a vessel. We are forging a weapon. Izuku looked down at the paper. The regimen was insane. It detailed macronutrient intakes in the thousands of calories, sleep schedules broken down into polyphasic cycles, and physical labor that bordered on torture. Your quirk, the 8 inner gates, operates by forcibly removing the brain's limiters, Toshinori explained, his tone shifting into that of a strict, uncompromising master. The first gate, the gate of opening, removes the inhibition on your muscular strength. As you experienced, it gives you access to 100% of your muscle's kinetic potential. But power without control is just an explosion. You use the first gate like a sledgehammer. I need you to learn how to use it like a scalpel. Toshinori pointed a bony finger at a massive, rusted pickup truck half buried in the sand 100 yards away. Your goal is to clear this entire beach before the UA entrance exam in 10 months. But here is the catch, Midoriya. You are to move this trash using only your base physical strength. Izuku blinked. My base strength. But I thought you were going to teach me how to use the first gate. I am, Toshinori smiled, a sharp, challenging grin. But if you rely on the gate to move the trash, you'll tear your ligaments to shreds within a week. You will only use your quirk when I explicitly instruct you to during our sparring and biofeedback sessions. The rest of the time, this beach is strictly manual labor. You have built a remarkable foundation, Izuku. Now we test its limits. Izuku looked at the rusted pickup truck. He looked at the millions of pounds of scrap metal. 10 months. He didn't complain. He didn't hesitate. He simply dropped his backpack, unbuttoned his school jacket, and walked down the concrete steps onto the sand. The 10 months of hell had begun. Months 1 to 3, the weight of the world. The first month broke him. Izuku had thought he understood physical exhaustion. He had spent 10 years carrying weights and doing thousands of push-ups. But there was a fundamental difference between controlled, isometric exercises in a bedroom and the chaotic, unbalanced, sheer brutal labor of moving irregular, jagged pieces of heavy machinery through deep, shifting sand. Every morning at 4 a.m., Izuku was at the beach. He started with the small items. Microwaves, tires, engine blocks, shattered dressers. He would tie thick, coarse ropes around his waist and drag the items up the beach, his calves burning as the sand gave way beneath his feet. Toshinori was always there, sitting on a lawn chair at the top of the seawall, drinking black coffee and barking corrections. Lower your center of gravity. You're lifting with your lower back. Drive through the heels. If your form breaks, your bones break. By the time Izuku went to school at 8 a.m., he was a walking corpse. He would sit at his desk in Aldera Junior High, his muscles twitching involuntarily, smelling faintly of rust and salt water despite thorough scrubbing. Bakugo watched him with narrowed, suspicious eyes. The explosive blonde couldn't understand why Izuku seemed even more exhausted and battered than usual, yet carried himself with a strange, unyielding quiet confidence that infuriated Bakugo to his core. At 4 p.m., Izuku was back at the beach, hauling trash until his hands bled through his gloves. It was during the second month that Toshinori introduced the quirk control training. The brain is a complex organic supercomputer, Toshinori explained one evening. Izuku was sitting in the sand, covered in dirt and sweat, his chest heaving. Right now your access to the first gate is tied to emotional extremes. Desperation. Panic. The instinct to save. You have to decouple the quirk from your emotions and tie it to your conscious will. Toshinori had Izuku sit in a meditative lotus position. Close your eyes. Breathe. I want you to visualize the inside of your mind. Find the limiter. It's a neurological wall. Don't shatter it. Don't blast it open. Find the handle, and turn it. Just a fraction. For weeks, Izuku failed. Whenever he tried to reach for the power, he either felt absolutely nothing, or his heart rate would instantly spike to dangerous levels, his skin flashing red before he panicked and shut it down, leaving him gasping in pain. It was a binary switch. Off, or suicidal explosion. You're anticipating the pain. Tashinori reprimanded him one night. You're afraid of your own power. As long as you fear the gate, it will command you. You must command it. It clicked in the middle of the third month. Izuku was struggling to push a rusted-out steel girder up a makeshift wooden ramp into a rented dumpster. The girder weighed easily 600 pounds. Izuku's boots were digging into the sand, his raw, bleeding hands slipping against the oxidized metal. He was completely out of leverage. The girder began to slide backward, threatening to crush him. I can't hold it. It's going to crush me. Panic flared. The instinct to blow the first gate wide open surged in his chest. No. Izuku clamped down on his own mind. Control. Scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He closed his eyes, visualizing the heavy, iron door in his mind. The gate of opening. Instead of kicking it off its hinges, Izuku reached out in his mind, grasped the handle, and cracked it open exactly 1 inch. Click. It happened so fast Tashinori almost missed it. For exactly 1/10 of a second, Izuku's skin flashed crimson. A tiny, localized shockwave of green energy pulsed from his arms. His muscles didn't bulge to monstrous proportions. They simply tightened with absolute, supreme density. With a sharp, explosive exhale, Izuku shoved the girder. The 600-pound piece of steel shot up the wooden ramp as if it had been fired from a cannon, crashing violently into the back of the dumpster with a deafening metallic clang. Izuku immediately slammed the mental door shut. The red flush vanished. The green aura dissipated. He fell to his knees, panting heavily. He waited for the excruciating pain. He waited for the sound of snapping ligaments. It didn't come. His arms ached with a deep, lactic burn, but they weren't broken. Ha! Izuku let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh, looking at his trembling hands. I did it. I controlled it. Tashinori, standing at the top of the ramp, smiled, a genuine look of immense pride washing over his skeletal features. You flickered it. You opened the first gate for a microsecond, utilized the explosive kinetic energy, and closed it before the biological blowback could damage your tissues. Tashinori walked down and placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. That is the key, Izuku. The flicker. If you can master opening and closing the first gate in fractions of a second upon impact, you can wield the strength of the gods without breaking the vessel. Excellent work. Izuku beamed, a radiant, exhausted smile cutting through the grime on his face. But the victory was short-lived. The beach was still 90% full. And the true hell was only just beginning. Months 4 to 7, the wall and the second gate. By the 5th month, Izuku had hit a wall. A massive, insurmountable biological wall. The flicker technique was brilliant, but it was incredibly taxing on his central nervous system. Between hauling literal tons of trash manually, practicing the precision timing of the first gate, attending school, and studying for the written portion of the UA exam, his body simply could not regenerate fast enough. He was sleeping 3 hours a night. He was eating 7,000 calories a day, but he was losing weight. His eyes were perpetually bruised with deep, purple bags. His movements, once sharp and precise, were becoming sluggish. The human body has a finite amount of ADP, adenosine triphosphate, the molecular currency of intracellular energy transfer. Izuku was burning through his ADP reserves faster than his mitochondria could synthesize it. It came to a head on a freezing morning in late November. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the sand into heavy, clinging mud. Izuku was dragging an entire car chassis across the beach using a harness strapped to his chest. The mud was up to his shins. Every step was an agony of screaming muscles and burning lungs. Keep your hips low. Tashinori shouted over the roar of the rain, huddled under a large umbrella. He hated seeing the boy suffer, but he knew the standards of UA. The villains wouldn't wait for a sunny day. Izuku groaned, his boots slipping in the mud. He tried to pull, but his legs simply refused to fire. The neuromuscular junctions in his thighs were completely depleted of neurotransmitters. He was neurologically and muscularly empty. His vision tunneled, the edges of his sight turning black. The roar of the rain faded into a dull ringing. I can't, Izuku thought, his knees buckling. I literally have nothing left. My cells are empty. He fell forward into the mud, the heavy harness pulling him down. He lay there, the freezing rain pelting his back. He couldn't even lift a finger. This wasn't a matter of willpower. This was biological failure. Izuku! Toshinori dropped the umbrella, rushing down the muddy slope, fear gripping his heart. Had he pushed the boy too far? As Toshinori reached him, rolling the boy onto his back, he saw Izuku's eyes fluttering shut. Deep within Izuku's brain, his survival instincts flared to life. The body was failing. The energy was gone. The brain, perceiving a fatal threat of exhaustion, bypassed the second neurological limiter. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was an evolution. The second gate, the gate of healing. Toshinori gasped, scrambling backward in the mud as a sudden, violent burst of steam erupted from Izuku's body. The freezing rain hissed as it hit the boy's skin, evaporating instantly. Izuku's eyes snapped open. They weren't just glowing, they were blazing like green suns. He sat up. The utter, crippling exhaustion that had paralyzed him a second ago vanished. The second gate, located in the medulla oblongata, didn't grant explosive kinetic strength like the first gate. Instead, it forcefully eradicated the limiters on the body's cellular respiration and metabolic rate. It forced the mitochondria to instantly synthesize massive amounts of ATP, violently accelerating blood flow and hyperoxygenating the muscles. It forcibly flushed all lactic acid and fatigue toxins from the muscle fibers. Izuku felt a surge of pure, unadulterated stamina flood his veins. It was as if he had just slept for a week and drank a gallon of adrenaline. He stood up, the mud flinging off his body. His skin wasn't flushed red, but his veins bulged, glowing with a faint, pulsing green light beneath his flesh. Midoriya! What did you do? Toshinori yelled over the rain. Izuku looked at his hands, clenching them into tight fists. He felt lighter than air. I'm not tired anymore. The fatigue, it's completely gone. Izuku turned around, grabbed the heavy chains of the harness, and leaned forward. He didn't use the first gate's strength. He used the second gate's endless stamina. He drove his legs into the mud like pistons, hauling the 1,000-pound car chassis up the beach at a dead sprint. Toshinori watched in absolute awe as the boy dragged the rusted metal through the storm like it was a toy wagon. Izuku worked for 10 straight hours without taking a single break. He moved more trash in that one afternoon than he had in the previous 2 weeks. He was a machine, impervious to fatigue, immune to lactic acid. But when the sun finally set and Izuku consciously closed the second gate, the true horror of the power revealed itself. The moment the glowing veins faded, Izuku dropped like a stone. He didn't just pass out. His body went into severe hypovolemic and hypoglycemic shock. Toshinori had to rush him to Dr. Tsubasa's private clinic in the dead of night. He's starving to death, Dr. Tsubasa yelled, frantically hooking Izuku up to 3 different 4 bags of glucose and saline. The boy looked completely emaciated, his cheeks sunken, his skin pale. His body fat percentage just dropped below 3%. What the hell did you two do? He unlocked the second gate, Toshinori said grimly, watching the monitors beep erratically. Dr. Tsubasa looked at the biometric readouts and paled. The gate of healing, no, that's a misnomer. It doesn't heal. It forcibly accelerates cellular metabolism. Toshinori, do you understand physics? Energy cannot be created from nothing. If his quirk forced his cells to instantly regenerate stamina, it had to burn fuel to do it. It burned his body's entire caloric reserve in a matter of hours. If he had kept that gate open for another 20 minutes, his body would have started cannibalizing his own internal organs for fuel. Toshinori felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. The 8 inner gates were truly a demonic power. Every gift came with a lethal tax. Izuku woke up 2 days later, ravenously hungry. From now on, Toshinori ordered, sitting by the hospital bed with a stern, uncompromising glare. You do not open the second gate unless it is an absolute emergency. And your diet is changing. 7,000 calories is a joke. If you are going to wield the gate of healing, you need fuel. The diet became the true hell. Izuku was forced to consume 15,000 calories a day. He drank mass gainer shakes that tasted like concrete. He ate whole chickens, dozens of eggs, and pounds of rice until he was physically sick, and then he was forced to eat more. His body became a biological furnace, constantly burning, constantly churning. But it worked. With a massive caloric surplus, Izuku began to intentionally practice with the second gate. He learned to control the flow, opening it just enough to flush his muscles of lactic acid between sets, allowing him to recover in minutes instead of days. He was no longer bound by human limitations of endurance. He could train for 20 hours a day. He was a perpetual motion machine. Months 8 to 9, the machine. Spring arrived in Mizurufu, bringing warmer weather and blooming cherry blossoms. But at Dagoba Beach, there was only the relentless, rhythmic sound of shifting metal. The beach was transforming. The mountains of trash were disappearing, revealing the pristine white sand beneath. Izuku Midoriya had fundamentally ceased to be a normal teenager. He had become a force of nature. He moved across the sand with terrifying efficiency. He didn't just drag the trash anymore, he threw it. He had mastered the flicker technique with the first gate. He could punch a rusted washing machine, opening the gate for a microsecond upon impact, sending the appliance flying 50 feet through the air perfectly into the back of a waiting dump truck, all without tearing a single muscle fiber. If his muscles grew weary, he would briefly open the second gate, his veins glowing green for a moment as he forced his cells to rapidly consume his massive caloric intake, instantly regenerating his stamina. Toshinori watched him from the seawall, a profound sense of awe mingling with a deep, existential dread. He was looking at a 15-year-old boy who had built a physical foundation that rivaled pro heroes in their 20s. The sheer density of Izuku's musculature was terrifying. He wasn't bulky or bloated like a bodybuilder. His muscles were compressed, wrapped around his calcified bones like high-tension steel cables. He has mastered the first and second gates, Toshinori thought, taking a sip from his thermos. He has decoupled the brain's limiters for kinetic strength and cellular stamina. But the remaining 6 gates. Toshinori had read Dr. Tsubasa's theoretical files. The first 2 gates were located in the brain. They were relatively safe, provided the vessel was strong enough. But the third gate, the gate of life, was located on the spinal cord. It didn't just remove a limiter. It aggressively forced the nervous system to overload the body with adrenaline and blood flow, turning the skin entirely red. It pushed the human body into a state of physiological hysteria. Midoriya! Toshinori called out, walking down to the sand as the sun began to set. Izuku dropped a massive tractor tire, wiping the sweat from his forehead. His breathing was completely even. Yes, All Might? Take a break. Let's talk. They sat on the seawall, watching the ocean lap gently against the newly cleared patches of sand. You've exceeded my wildest expectations, Izuku, Toshinori said honestly. Your control over the first 2 gates is phenomenal. But we need to discuss the third gate. Izuku's expression grew serious. He looked down at his scarred, calloused hands. The gate of life, Toshinori said softly. Dr. Tsubasa theorizes that opening it will push your cardiovascular system beyond its maximum safe limit. Your heart rate will exceed 400 beats per minute. Your blood will literally begin to cook you from the inside out. Toshinori looked Izuku in the eye. You must swear to me that you will not attempt to open it. The UE exam is next month. The first 2 gates, combined with your base physical strength, are more than enough to pass the practical exam. Do not push your luck. The vessel is strong, but it is not invincible. Izuku looked out at the ocean. He remembered the feeling of helplessness when Bakugo was trapped in the sludge. He remembered the feeling of his arm shattering when he was 4. I won't use it against a robot in an exam, Izuku promised, his voice calm and resolute. But All Might, if someone's life is on the line, and the first gate isn't enough, I won't hesitate. A hero doesn't calculate the cost of a life. Toshinori looked at the boy's profile, illuminated by the dying sun. He saw the same suicidal, burning sense of justice that had driven him to sacrifice his own stomach to defeat all for one. Toshinori sighed, a mix of pride and sorrow in his chest. I know, kid. I know. Just try not to break my heart by dying before you graduate, alright? Izuku smiled, a genuine, bright expression. I promise, All Might. I won't die. Month 10, the climax. It was the morning of the UA entrance exam. February 26th. The air was bitter cold, a biting frost clinging to the concrete of the city. Toshinori Yagi drove his pickup truck down the coastal highway toward Dagoba Beach at 5 a.m. He expected to find Izuku finishing up the last small pile of trash they had designated for the final day. Toshinori parked the truck and walked up to the edge of the seawall. He stopped dead in his tracks. The thermos of coffee slipped from his bony fingers, clattering loudly against the concrete, spilling hot liquid over his shoes. He didn't notice. The beach was entirely, utterly pristine. Not a single rusted can, not a single piece of broken glass, not a single tire remained. It was a sprawling, immaculate expanse of smooth white sand, kissed by the gentle, rolling waves of the Pacific Ocean. It was beautiful, and standing at the very edge of the water, facing the rising sun, was Izuku Midoriya. He wasn't wearing a shirt. His back was turned to Toshinori, the dawn light casting deep, dramatic shadows over the terrifying, hyper-defined topography of his back muscles. He looked like a statue carved by a mad sculptor obsessed with strength. He cleared it all, Toshinori whispered, his breath catching in his throat. There was still tons left yesterday. He must have worked through the entire night. Izuku heard the thermos drop. He slowly turned around, looking up at his mentor on the seawall. Izuku didn't look exhausted. He didn't look tired. He looked completely, utterly alive. All Might, Izuku called out, his voice carrying clearly over the sound of the waves. I finished.